Hi, you with Julian on the Brown Note. Gone but Forgotten, which is where I review an album or sometimes an artist that were denied classic status at the time or have been completely forgotten about. This time around, a review of Hüsker's Copper Blue, and that might be pushing it because some people will say everyone knows that Hüsker and the album Copper Blue are landmarks, but I'm seeing a lot of revisionism around the grunge era. Not something I was a massive fan of, but at the time I think the holy trinity were either Pearl Jam's Ten, Nirvana's Nevermind, or Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream. Argue what you want about two of those being grunge. For me, it was probably less Pearl Jam and Hüsker's Copper Blue that were in that list. And since then, I have listened to Siamese Dream and Copper Blue regularly, but I've never gone back to Nevermind. In the same way I've never gone back to What's the Story, Morning Glory. Is it overplayed, or did I not like it as much as I thought? I think probably overplayed more. But when I'm seeing the revisionism now of that era, I'm seeing Alice in Chains get mentioned, I'm seeing Stone Temple Pilots get mentioned. Not necessarily bands that I think were that acclaimed at the time or deserved to be. But Hüsker were a three-piece band that formed by Bob Mould. Bob Mould was the co-leader of Hüsker Dü. Now, the other holy trinity of pre-grunge and actually American alternative guitar music through a rancid 1980s where any notion of alternative guitar music was zero, was Hüsker Dü, the Pixies and Sonic Youth. They were the holy trinity there. And Bob Mould was a leader of Hüsker Dü, and their music is canonized. He went on, released some solo work, and then came back with another three-piece, which was Hüsker. And their debut album, Copper Blue, for me is a masterpiece. And I think most people think it is. He had David Barbe from Mercyland and Malcolm Travis from Sexual Response as the drummer. So there were another three-piece. And Copper Blue came out, and I think won Album of the Year the same year that Nevermind came out in the New Musical Express. I might be wrong about that. But the notion that Hüsker Dü and the Pixies had, which Sonic Youth didn't, was the idea of pop. Melodic chord progressions. Like Sonic Youth were very much ploughing atonal, avant-garde, experimental. Both the Pixies and Hüsker Dü had a love of the Beatles. I don't know if they did, but I'm assuming they did. So did Nirvana. So did Kurt Cobain. Definitely. So they tried to weld, as in W-E-L-D, the noise with melody, which has been a relationship throughout music history. I really like pop music being much noisier, has been like a common thread throughout the music that a lot of people have loved. Copper Blue arrived from nowhere. Bob Mould's was, the Pixies were still going. They were still really trendy. The Sonic Youth were still going. And even Neil Young was still going. But Bob Mould was a nobody. The Hüsker Dü Appreciation Society was certainly there. His solo albums at that point, and he's done many more since Hüsker finished their 3-album run, it was acclaimed, but it was a footnote to what was going on. Copper Blue came out of nowhere, really. And I did a list on my radio show, not of albums that I think are the greatest of all time, but albums that I continually go back to. And as I said at the top, I don't listen to Nevermind very often. I do listen to Siamese Dream often. Every year, without fail, I will go through a period of listening to it. Same with Copper Blue. For me, it stood the test of time, and I keep going back to it. It kicks off with the Act We Act. It's a perfect scene-setting album opener. It's got this churning warmth. It's this is Siamese Dream was like a tech head's wet dream. 57 overdubbed guitar parts. I love it. For me, it's a shoegaze album, not a grunge album. Copper Blue was more like Nevermind in that the parts were very, very small. There was only a few elements past their main three music. I'm just looking up at the producer. Yeah, he's not Lou Giordano, and Bob Mould as well. It's got this warmth about it. It's like autumnal. It sort of feels like the passing of time in conjunction with relationships. Bob Mould was already 40. He was 31 by this stage, but he'd also spent 10 years in the music industry by this stage. And it's got a wall of sound. One thing I really like about this is it doesn't try like Sonic Youth to be atonal. There's guitar hero worship here. When this, like the riffs are really stinging throughout this album, but the solos are really impactful and they're closer to probably Pearl Jam and Ten than they are to Nevermind. They're really sort of satisfying. Like the person has a love of Kiss or, a hard rock act that leans towards mainstream acceptance, has a sort of, there's a wall of sound here, but there's also a great deal of pop sensibility going on. Bob Mould's a great writer of pop songs. He really is. The first four songs on Copper Blue form a song cycle, and I thought it was ironic that one of their they only released 3 albums, but one of their later albums was notable. They did Fuel, and which is File Under Easy Listening, and they also did Beaster, the Beaster EP, and I'm pretty sure that was the one that was a song cycle where each song bled into, it was one song and each of them, like, it bled into a new movement and it bled into a new movement. That's the opening 4 songs on Copper Blue. It is equal to the opening 4 songs on any rock album ever. Every track is magnificent, and they all fade in, and then the other one kicks in over the top. Absolutely magnificent. The Act We Act, the opener, long track, it sort of sets in stone that this album is about relationships and nothing more. There's no political element to this album. It's a look back at relationships. It's sort of like, this happened to me in the past, and this is how it made me feel. It's a very narrow band that it operates on. A good idea churns away the second track. It's got this Pixies bass. Another of the elements of this album is it's very Pixies in sort of gigantic era. So it's got this really sort of like very, very like floor shaking bass with very pop sensibilities over the top. And that was what was big about the Pixies. Even from Surfer Rosa, was a song like Gigantic was just, it had such a great hook and chorus and was really noisy, and that's what everyone loved about it. And a good idea. It was great. Changes, the third track, is the best track on the whole album. It's got this Blue Oyster Cult chiming riff going through it, and it's superb. But the coda, where everything sort of starts backing up and reversing, is just magnificent. And again, this is one time where there's lots of overlaid guitar parts, and they're absolutely fantastic. It's not like the sort of weak fey indie music or even Pavement style indie music. It's almost like part of him is wanting to be a guitar god, and I've always loved that. Even like Hüsker Dü, There are definite elements where they're trying to rock out like Kiss would rock out, and I love that about them. The coda of Changes is just magnificent. I recently did my top 200 tracks of all time. Changes was in it, and then that folds straight into Helpless again. Another stinging, beautiful riff, absolutely superb. The opening 4 tracks on this album were as good as any album for me. It's amazing, and then it folds into Hoover Dam, which is a slightly woollier sound, but it almost ends as the reflection back on those 4 tracks, which were very sort of molten guitar and very sort of stinging riffs and good solos and churning chord progressions. And Hoover Dam has got like acoustic elements in. It's one of the strongest sides to any rock album ever, period. And it's short. It's like 20 minutes have gone by of your life. And it's fantastic, and I've gone back to it over and over. Never dulls. He was never sexy enough to be, you know, the Smashing Pumpkins had that element of Billy Corgan being really annoying. And then being interesting to look at, you know, James and they had Darcy, you know, they had this interesting visual component and videos. Sugar never had any of that. He wasn't a very attractive man, and there was nothing to hang it on. You know, Kurt Cobain was like, I saw him compared as the most charismatic man since Marlon Brando in the 1950s. Bob Mould was never there, but the music was. The second half of this equation is side 2. And the Slim, which kicks it off, signals that it's going to be looser. I feel that he realised that he created a perfect run of songs, and they're less perfect than the first side, but they still add a lot to it. So the Slim that opens the second side is a looser sounding track. If I Could Change Your Mind, the second track of the second side, was actually a pop hit. That was the one that they put out there because that was pure acoustics in an era when this was like the first year of Copper Blue was 92, so it was kind of like the first 12-month period where this sort of level of guitar assault was common in the pop charts. So something like If I Could Change Your Mind, which was an acoustic song, was really, really focused on. Even though it's a lesser song on the album, it still showcases what a brilliant pop writer Bob Mould is. I like the fact that the Fortune Teller Slick, like Fortune Teller could be the album gradating off, but I think that Slick and Man on the Moon engage in a little bit more of wayward experimentation, which is very needed at this point because everything is slotted in. So it could start dragging because the first 4 songs are so good, and even Hoover Dam is so good that you can get to this side and feel like it's sort of tapering. This is an album front loaded like Nevermind and it is very similar to the fact that Nevermind's second side isn't quite as anywhere near as devastating as that first side. But I do really like the fact that it's got a couple of tracks at the end, and there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tracks on the second side as well. Man on the Moon is superb, easily could have rounded out the first side of the album. I wonder if it was ever sitting there. And it's got some more sort of, it almost reminds me, it could be off Automatic for the People by R.E.M. A little bit noisier, but I can certainly see it slotting in that area. And the almost a Lemonheadsy vibe to some of the tracks on there. I think lyrically everything is about relationships and the past, but it feels like the passing of seasons. And it's never, it didn't grate on me in that manner 20, 30 years ago, and it doesn't now. It's always stayed the same. And I think that's the embodiment of whether something was good in the first place, the fact that it's still exactly the same pocket that it occupied years ago. So I think this is a superb album. For me, it has stood the test of time, and I'm going to give Copper Blue a 9.5 out of 10. I don't quite think the second half is quite as stellar as the first half, which I would probably give a Spinal Tap 11 out of 10 for that first 5 songs. I can't say that the second 5 songs are as good, but as an album, and to get that blast of that first perfect side of an album is essential. So Copper Blue, 9.5 out of 10. In Gone But Forgotten.